Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. I have with me three lovely young ladies and educators who work directly with students. And I brought them on today because I'm curious to see how this current situation that we all find ourselves in is impacting our education community, and moreover, just how the education community has been affected by all the different changes from the administration to COVID. And let's start with some introductions.
Hi, I'm Allison Bacheldor. I teach second grade in Sacramento, California. This is my ninth year. I'm going into my ninth year teaching. Seen a lot of changes, and I'm excited to discuss some of the current changes we're seeing right now.
Hi, I'm Claudia Conti. I'm currently a program specialist for special education in East Palo Alto. I think this is my 20th year. I took a 3-year hiatus as a vice principal, and I'm now back with the littles, preschool, and kinder through 5th grade.
My name is Kayla Ulrich. I'm also a primary teacher in Sacramento and have had experience teaching abroad as well as throughout different parts of California, going into my 9th year as well.
Awesome. So again, thank you all for coming on here. I know that as educators, time is one thing you guys don't have a huge commodity of. The job is truly a 24/7, 365 endeavor, especially if you're trying to do the best you can to help educate the future generations of America and, in some of your cases, abroad. I first want to start with how the COVID situation has affected your teaching structure during the initial outbreak.
It's interesting that you pointed out that it's a nonstop job. And I feel like since March 13th, when our schools closed because of COVID, it has been nonstop to this day. It's all I think about. It's all I'm planning about. And initially, and I'm sure the other ladies will speak to this, it was like such a chaotic moment. And there were so many uncertainties that I just remember feeling so out of control with it all. But I respected the decision for our schools to close. So it was like a lost place for a little bit at the beginning to figure out how to best support our kids right away.
Yeah, I think personally, just like you said, it was really difficult. It was like all of a sudden you're like, oh, you're at home. Well, this is for a few weeks. And then it was like, no, we need a long-term plan. And it was really challenging to get the kids all connected to devices or get them devices in their hand. And then you still had connectivity issues. And then you have the ability for the parents to be able to help them at home with the tasks, with the technology. And I think that we assume because it's 2020 that everyone knows how to use Zoom, or everyone knows how to do things on the computer because it's 2020, and that's not the case. So it was really hard, but like you said, it's 24/7. And I think the hardest part during this has been, in the beginning, we felt some praise and some accolades towards teachers, and then slowly that shifted. And now it's become, well, what are the teachers doing if they're not seeing them for more than X, number of minutes a day via Zoom? And that hurts because I know you guys are working your tails off. So.
Yeah, I think I obviously have similar feelings. Like, it was very much just shocking. And when we left that day, we were told, don't say anything to our students, and don't send them materials home because not everyone's here. So it's not equitable, but we don't know when we'll see them again. So initially it was really hard to plan because our students don't necessarily have, accessibility, but they don't even have pen and paper at home necessarily all the time. And so that was a struggle. We just started making a bank of video lessons or just doing what we could. But I think it blurred even more the line between what is work and is this your life? Because obviously educators, teaching is a lifestyle rather than a job. Because even right now, it's summer, but I've spent the morning, contacting back parents who have reached out to me about different things happening, and it's summer, this isn't a paid time for any of us. It's not like vacation, but we're just not getting paid. But I think that there's going into next year, it was one thing when it was like an emergency, but if this is planned, it is hard to keep that balance because we were literally responding to, like 24/7, on the phone, on FaceTime, doing tech support, doing all of that without like having a boundary of the fact that this is still a job, but trying to understand that other people have schedules and, we can't all be doing the same thing at the same time. And so like, I think that's where it's going to be a little bit difficult going into next year if like, we also still have to have time to take care of ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And
I think you hit on two. Sorry, Allison.
okay.
I was just want to say you just hit on two things: self-care for you as an individual, as a teacher, right? Because burnout rate in education is high as it is, and then you put the trauma on top of. The pandemic is traumatic for us as adults being sheltered in place and has its own consequences for us emotionally. So if we have it as adults, what are our kids feeling? And the trauma that we as adults who love our kids as our own, not being able to say goodbye to them and not having any formal closure at the end of the year, especially for those of us who may have I think in general, but like if you're changing school sites or, like our site principals left to LA, there wasn't really any closure. But even when you're closing out the end of the year with your little second graders and they love and adore you and they want to hug you and say goodbye and see you, and everything's so finalized as it is at the end of a school year. So that's been really hard. It's going to be tricky to see how we come back.
I think one thing that you just touched on, Claudia, that I'm curious to know more about, when you mentioned the school principal dipping for LA, I want to know what your experiences are regarding the support or lack thereof you received. And I know this could potentially be a hot button political statement given, the work that you ladies do, but how do you feel the system in and of itself, or more micro level, how your individual schools and administrations helped you guys when this first came on scene and you guys were told almost immediately, okay, all your lesson plans, scrap them, start over on a digital basis and figure out how to make this work? What was the support system you guys received?
Each other.
Yeah, definitely your coworkers was key. Because like Claudia mentioned, even with families, maybe not being technology savvy. A lot of teachers also aren't. Like this was a huge learning curve for anyone, whether you're a 22-year-old first year teacher or a veteran teacher. And it was like, boom, you need to know how to manage 30 kids on a computer. You need to be fluent in Google Sites, Google Classroom, Google Hangout. And well, for us, it was Google. It was just quick. I think our district did a better job of giving us more time before there was a serious expectation of what your Monday through Friday should look like. But even that chunk of time where they kind of were letting us, I don't know, Kayla, if you want to chime in, letting us explore, if you will, there still wasn't a clear light at the end of the tunnel. We were just pulling resources from each other and just trying our best to build a platform and not leave these kids hanging.
The catch-22 is that the educators that don't have the technology skills and have never, done that, and then now we're all separated. So there were our colleagues that couldn't even get on Zoom to do the Zoom training. You have to have at least a baseline knowledge. And then so at the time I was staying at Allison's house, and we were probably on calls with our peers and our colleagues supporting for 2-3 hours a day.
Yeah, we really quickly became IT people, and I'm not in any way qualified to help people that way, I didn't think.
Yeah, I had the similar experience. My preschool team, some of them were really great at just getting on and creating all of these activities online. The speech therapist blew my mind, right? And then I have one great teacher who's eager and ready to learn, but she doesn't know much about tech. And so it was literally like, okay, let's FaceTime. And then let me like teach you how to share a screen. And then let me show you just how to hold a Zoom meeting. And, but that happened on multi, levels of support, right? Tiers of support. Okay, I've got the Zoom down. Now how do I send an invite? Like it's so complex, not even just to get the kids on there. It's just like the invites and the links and then the district's like, here, let's use Seesaw. Great. So we had a couple teachers using Seesaw and it looks fairly easy, but again, if you don't have experience, you know, how do you do it? So we're providing like online tutorials for them to watch, but that's hard if you're a hands-on learner like me.
I think if this isn't indicative of the lack of specifically financial support that teachers and administrators who work within the field specifically aren't receiving, because in this particular instance, not only were you guys developing brand new lesson plans from scratch to accommodate distance learning, but you were also acting as pseudo therapists and psychiatrists for a lot of your students, especially at those ages. You know, like perhaps a student in high school, or in my case, continuing education at university, we kind of understand what's going on. But a 7-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old has a very limited grasp, and some of them are more acutely aware of what's going on than others. But you know, you guys do so much in terms of doing all these extracurricular activities that, you know, parents and public school funding almost just intrinsically expects you to do without the extra pay. You know, I mean, if you extrapolate that, we're talking about dollars an hour. And I think, you know, you guys aren't being treated with the regard that you deserve. And I think it shows with how hard you guys work and how little of the accolades you receive from it.
I agree.
Like our principal, as much as I respect him, but our district had him in meetings all day long. Like there was no, you know, so I can't speak to like any support that he would have been able to give had he not been in that. But it was almost like now all of a sudden we're IT people and we have to overnight become masters of IT to support. I mean, because my boyfriend works in customer service for Apple. So like he supports only on Apple devices. And I was like, I don't know how you do this job. And then I started thinking about it. I'm like, no, but I support on grandma's tablet and, you know, like the kids' iPhone. That's, you know, I'm like, I'm literally supporting on any device, including like, I don't have that type of computer and I'm expected to then support, and we're supporting our teachers, and then the teachers are having to support their families. So I mean, Allison and I ended up working a lot with like 4th grade and 6th grade, and, you know, and like we would have to literally get on FaceTimes, help another teacher get on their Zoom call before their Zoom call. And it was all only our community,
Right.
you know, and like,
And
it was just like another hat to have to add on top of everything.
And I feel like we're always left a little bit in the dark. So my students were given different computers than they had in my classroom for the entire year. So then I had to build some relationships with families to be like, hey, can you FaceTime with me? Because I literally don't even know the kind of computer you have. If it's the same as what I had in the classroom, what's already on their desktop. So I had to like, you know, find some families that would allow that too, because it was a learning curve, again, like Kayla's saying, because I hadn't even used that technology yet or taught them how to use it. And in that waiting time of, we'll let you know what your platform will be and what we expect from you, I'm like, who's helping you make those decisions? Because no teachers at our site were being asked, hey, is Google the best platform for you? Is Seesaw the best for you? Is Class Dojo the best? Like, I always just feel like we're left out of these decisions that then really impact our day to day. And it's not easy.
I have to say, I'm very fortunate to be in the district that I'm in right now with the current leadership team, because our new superintendent is amazing. And the entire district level team is very supportive, innovative, and always trying to get surveys and get teachers' input and such. It's not perfect, but is it ever, right? Because kind of like Kayla said, you know, the principal is in a meeting all day. Yeah, that I was literally in back-to-back IEPs or meetings for planning on how to do distance learning for 10 hours a day. And it does not make one to be not crabby. But I think the biggest complaint I heard from my teachers from preschool all the way up through 8th grade was the technology and the time spent just trying to get the kids up on technology, or to show up or what have you, but really was that connectivity that was taking so much time. So especially for the little ones, by the time they connected and were on, they were done. They were not able to sit for much longer. So I think that's part of the frustration maybe for parents too, because they're like, well, my kid only did 20 minutes of work. That's because your poor kiddo was already on the computer for like 40 minutes, 20 of those minutes were spent trying to connect.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing to kind of add into that is there will almost assuredly, and I'm sure you can all speak on this, the massive chasm that exists between folks that are perhaps middle and upper middle class that have more resources for the, LTE Wi-Fi versus perhaps a kid whose family does not or can't afford the newest model computer in order to keep up with all of the updates with Zoom and with Google and with, Mac OS operating systems. So how did you guys navigate that specifically? Because I feel like that, as much as anything, because those kids are often the same ones that are disenfranchised when things are working well.
In my district, we tried to give hotspots, but again, it wasn't perfect. And some families that said they had Wi-Fi, they did, but it wasn't very good Wi-Fi. So it was constantly cutting off. And that to me blew my mind because I was like, is there a difference in Wi-Fi? Like, I didn't even know. I didn't know as a 43-year-old person. Like, didn't know. So what did you guys do?
I was pleased with our district because they pretty quickly were able to, get a lot of computers out to kids and also offered hotspots. There was a little, like irony at first that they sent out a technology survey to parents and in an email. So like if they didn't have technology, how would they get that email? And you're like, okay, hold on, let's make sure everyone's getting access to this. But I do think in the end, so many kids were able to get a computer and hotspots. I can't speak to how well they work or not. And I noticed a few of my kids who you could tell like they'd be trying to do Zoom outside, probably to get out of like a louder house or if parents are working from home. And that would really affect the internet, but I wasn't. It's hard because you want to like be proud of them. They're making this good choice to remove themselves from a distracted area, but then they're super choppy on Zoom. I don't know, Kayla?
That kind of makes me think of, we were seeing that our families were using the hotspots like all the time. Like all the time, all day, every day, 7 days a week. So the company that was donating the Wi-Fi had to set limits to it. I mean, that's just trial and error. You don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, it's so hard because like we got the technology out but like that's not the only equitable issue. Like we gave it to a bunch of our families and like Allison and I went to an apartment building and like social distance and like had to set up the kids' computers because like we could track that they're going on YouTube and they're doing all these things and they're so excited, but they're not, they didn't know how to use a computer or how to get on, and like their parents don't speak English as well. And it was like, it was just a language barrier and like they didn't know what was expected, and so it was kind of, the kids are pretty autonomous. And so when it all like lies in the hands of a 6 and 7-year-old, of course they're going to go on YouTube. Or like I ran into problems the same as Allison of just it being like a spatial issue inside the house.
Yeah.
Like that connectivity was hard. Like I had a kid that always be like, Miss Ulrich, you're glitching. I'm like, that's fine. Just hold on. Just be patient. We can be patient. And like the other kids would be like, okay, stop messing around. Like, like that type of thing, it's frustrating, but you can kind of work through it. And then but some of like the lag time was difficult to work with, where you're like, you think someone hasn't answered and then you move on and then you hear their answer back and you're like, okay, sorry. But a lot of it was just like having space inside the house for them to learn, or maybe not having headphones at home. And so the input, it's hard because you want to just say like, we can mute. And that was kind of like a funny little trend that was going around. But I was thinking, like, if that's what they're hearing, how can they learn too? So like, it's easy for us to mute it and be like, why is your brother screaming? But really, then we're missing a really important factor that's impacting their learning. Or like one of my students didn't have any privacy to like want to try or learn, and like her mom put a towel over herself on the computer. And I was like, this is, that it's not the same as a kid who has his own bedroom to be in.
Right.
Yeah, the learning environments are not equitable at all.
No.
And the support, you could see such a difference if it's a family who the parents maybe are younger and were like really into Google Classroom and knew how to use it, and then the other ones where you can tell it's a 7-year-old just trying to do it by themselves, or parents who are gone and working versus parents who were at home and were able to help. And I was really pleased to find out we weren't grading our students, because to me, I'm like, you're just grading their privilege, lack of a better word, like their ability to have help, to have a quiet place to work, to
and that's not an indictment on any family dynamic, because everyone has a different situation, and not everyone has the privilege to lock themselves in their own bedroom, or has both parents that are able to dedicate time away from their work in order to help their kids get set up. Unfortunately, life is not generally equitable, and the folks that already are on the sort of wrong end of the spectrum, and by no fault of anyone's, will be the most adversely affected. So I commend you guys for your efforts in actually going to apartment buildings and setting up routers and teaching kids how to use Zoom. I mean, this is I think what a lot of people who think that teachers and public schools don't need as much funding, they don't need this, they don't need that, the money's a waste. It's like, I don't think you really understand what educators are doing. And I don't necessarily mean administrators, because that's a different it's a different discussion, but the actual teachers who are doing the one-on-ones, or in some cases 25-on-1s, because that's roughly how many kids are in a class. They don't know what you guys are doing. You guys are Swiss Army knives.
And the environment normally is something we have such control over. Like, we spend so long creating a classroom that is, a place for all of them to learn, to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to explore all these things that we now have zero control over the environment they wake up in and are in all day to try to learn. And that has to be considered, because
and the language barrier is another huge thing that Kayla mentioned. I mean, Kayla speaks beautiful Spanish and is fluent in Spanish. I am not. Many of my teachers are not. And so we had to rely on scheduling with a translator. That was really hard.
And some of it is cultural too, so like I had families that were like so appreciative of everything that they have, that they were like, no, I already have a cell phone with data, so I'm not going to take a computer because it's going to take from someone else. And I kept being like, get the computer, it's free, and like a few families just didn't take it because they didn't want to take it from someone else who had more of a need. And it came from a really good place, or maybe, and partially not, they didn't know like what kind of assignments we would be giving and things like that, because then some of my students were doing it on like a cell phone, which is a temporary band-aid, but it's not going to give them the best access to what we're doing, because they're going to need to be able to type, or, see things full screen, because we would do like reading groups, and one girl was like, I'm having a hard time zooming in. I'm like, oh no, what are you on your phone? Okay. So like that was hard, and you can't even blame anyone from that except for just like not knowing.
Right.
What do you guys think? How do you think this is going to progress in the fall? when you guys get back into the swing of things, how do you think this is going to change? And do you think that you guys have enough of a grasp? I mean, within the 6 months you guys have been doing this, but do you think you have enough of a grasp as educators on how to create more dynamic online social distance learning plans? Or is it just, you're just going to kind of keep doing what you've been doing and see where it takes you?
It's a loaded question.
I think a lot of us are still waiting on like parameters set by district and union agreements.
Yeah.
Like, right now we have an idea that we'll probably be doing more live lessons on Zoom. And so planning around, how to engage students there and working with primary students, I ran into a lot of the fact that like when I was with the 6th grade classes doing Zoom, they really liked talking to one another, but the 6-year-olds, they play, and so how do you create these environments for them to play with each other when like they don't yet know how to minimize screens and do so it's like, and how do you give them that relationship building while on the computer? And so like just knowing, we kind of have brainstormed around best ways to do that type of thing, or like things that lend themselves better to live instruction. And then I think we're going to use Google Classroom again. But we're not like we don't know yet.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. We know we're starting online, so we have that piece. And I feel a little more confident knowing that the students that I'm getting last year, from March on, used computers and worked from home. And I can talk to their teacher about that and kind of see their comfort level. So at least it's not, again, like a fresh group. I can't imagine being like a TK or a kindergarten teacher right now. That would be really intimidating to me.
Yeah.
I feel a tiny bit better knowing that the first graders that I'll now have in 2nd grade did a version of distance learning already. So that's helpful.
Yeah, I think you just hit the, what do you say, the nail on the, whatever that saying is. But yeah, kinder is really hard. That's going to be super tricky, kinder and 1st grade. 1st grade might be a little easier for our district because they were up and doing it and they had their tablets and such. We did come up with some parameters around just from the state guidelines and how many minutes they're requiring us to have kids via live lessons, synchronous, I'm going to say that word wrong, asynchronous and lessons or not. And so we kind of went through, we brainstormed together with our subcommittees, and we just said, like, what's realistic? What's a maximum amount of time that a kindergartner could be on the computer? And then what's the minimum amount of time that we want to expect? And then that for 1st and 2nd, and then upper grades. And we did it, we broke it down like that. Originally we had kinder through 2nd, and the teachers were like, they're very different. Kinders are very different from even 1st. I mean, even 1st and 2nd, kind of can shift, but you can at least clump that time together and say, okay, at least 60 minutes a day, right, of live online teaching. But we were brainstorming this so that we really kind of have a template also to share with the families and say, this is what we're expecting. This is what you should be expecting from us, and this is what we're expecting from you. So it also just feels a little bit more concrete, and we're going to have set schedules. So each teacher will figure out their schedule, and that will be shared with the parents. We've also learned like the same ID number for the room, so the parents aren't constantly having to use a new ID number. And we will be using certain platforms. So Seesaw for the younger little ones, and then Google Classroom for 3rd through 8th grade, I believe. I'm not 100. It might just be 3rd through 5th, but I think it's through 8th grade. So our stuff is kind of planned out, but we had it like beautifully figured out on how to bring them back in a hybrid model. And then all of a sudden it was like, yeah, we have 400 cases in our area. We are not coming back. So.
Yeah. Well, and when this all happened, like I just made a folder on my email, and I just kept putting virtual resource, because it was just so much stuff. And I think that was everyone's like, how can I help? Let me just spam you. And so I think that now what we're sort of doing as a district, and probably most people in general, it's like, yeah, there are all these great things, but it was really hard for the parents, you know, like, I mean, imagine being an IT person helping a 6-year-old learn how to edit a PDF. It's not reasonable.
No, it's not
I
fun.
can't edit a PDF. I need some help, Kayla.
We're still drawing and labeling, and then boom, the next week we're editing PDFs.
That's going to be the next installment with you ladies. We're going to have Kayla teach us all how to edit PDFs, because I'm in college and I have no idea what I'm doing.
You need to download Cami.
It was like what they were having to do, and also impressive, you know, so it can speak to the fact that when, you know, how resilient and adaptive kids are, and they were doing fun and cool things that I wouldn't have necessarily expected of them. But like, that being said, Allison and I moving into next year, we're like, we want it streamlined. Like, we want them to be masters of it, the same way that when you're working in a classroom, you want to have those routines and procedures so that the focus is the content.
Absolutely.
You know, and so how do you build that into your sites that it's automatic? You know, we have Dojo for parent messaging, we have Google Classroom for this, and it's everything streamlined.
Yeah. I'm curious to hear how you ladies felt about just like this idea of shifting all to digital learning, right? But kind of looking at it and going, wait, we're supposed to be 21st century learning. Like, we should have been doing a lot of this a long time ago.
Or at least developing a infrastructure that could handle a situation like this, so that when it happens, because in a world where pandemics and viruses and catastrophes can happen at the drop of a hat, you need to have something set up as a contingency plan, because it's not always reasonable to expect. I mean, it doesn't have to be a pandemic. It could be a 1989 San Francisco earthquake that shuts down all schools. Like what then? You know, and you can't just tell kids to stop learning. And I mean, as we've seen over the last 20 years, America already struggles in, it seems like, most standardized tests when compared to the rest of the world. So like impeding their ability to learn is inherently problematic in a system where it's already problematic.
It definitely, to me, it's shown a light again on like, you can't replace in-person education with technology. So I totally agree that like I dropped the ball on some things. Like my second graders could clearly already be doing a lot more on a computer than I ever was exposing them to. But I still just stand strong with like my expertise, my knowledge, who I am as a teacher is more important than the computer. So like,
absolutely,
it's so hard to find that balance. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things I probably should have already taught them how to do on a computer, but when do you find the time when also I'm supposed to teach them, you know, a million and one other things?
And be their psychiatrist.
And be their psychiatrist and their nurse, and sometimes
and walk their parents through the new systems.
And not to mention have my own things that I go through. And yeah, I feel a little like I dropped the ball technology wise for years, but I'm also like, no, because what I have to offer is way more important.
Well, I think especially at the ages that you and Kayla and Claudia all focus on, most of that learning comes from interaction. It comes from talking with your peers. And I mean, it might be a 7-year-old speaking level, but that's how you learn, right? And yeah, you can learn from reading and watching videos online, but up until probably middle school, the vast majority of what you're learning in terms of how to be a good team player, how to involve yourself in group projects, how to, you know, how things look and feel in terms of like doing the physical experiments of being out there and picking things up off the ground and putting them down, then asking your teacher, hey, what is this thing? Can you explain this thing to me? That's almost impossible to happen if you're doing everything exclusively through a virtual meeting place. And again, perhaps for an adult or a young adult, it's a little bit more manageable because they've already sort of had their inquisitive mind formed. But at that age, at 6-7 years old, that's all still forming. And not having someone in front of them who they can approach, who they trust, who is a confidant, who is also an educator, but cares about their well-being, you know, it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The tech in class is still like an equity piece because
Yeah.
we work in a school that serves mainly Black and Brown students, and I did not have computers last year. So Allison's students, she had my old class, and they hardly use computers, a couple times a year. But then guess what? Every single computer got pulled for testing, and testing takes 2 to 3 months. For state testing, and so no younger kids had computers during that time. And then, you know, like even this year I got my own computer card, and I was like, yay. I mean, they're all the old hand-me-downs computers, so every time that my students get on, and it's, you know, like I pride myself in organization. It is an organized cart. Like they know.
That is an innate character quality, Kayla. That is innate. I've known that for years.
And even still, like every time they would get on, you know, like we had so many headphones that just didn't work because we got the cheapest ones. And also I didn't have headphones for 3 months because the principal, like, you know, and we couldn't figure out funding for them, which they like required that they would have a listening program. So I have 30 computers going off on different, you know, like
different levels,
on different
headphones.
Yeah.
And all of that time to get them on computers. Whereas like when I grew up, when we went to computer lab, you turned on the computer and it worked.
Right.
You know, so they're not learning skills, even if we are putting them on computers, they're not.
Yeah.
I mean, they're learning how to like determine whether or not headphones work or not, and then toss them.
Right.
And then the kid comes in the trash and goes, can I keep them?
Right.
I mean, that's first grade for you.
Right.
And that's a learning experience. Like that's something you can't get necessarily at home.
No.
for better or worse, reaching your hand in a garbage can, you know, learning experience, but for better or worse, it's a learning experience.
Can I reuse this for an art project at home? Well,
And I can just only imagine the level of frustration that must be at home, and it's to nobody's fault, but
Yeah.
to have kids and families thrown into this situation as well, it couldn't have been easy for a lot of families. And again, that's not a environment where a child can be creative and like focus and learn, and it's no one's fault.
It's hard for a college student to be able to focus when there's madness and your home is turned upside down. So if you're 6 years old, you almost have no chance.
Right.
And then to what Kayla was talking about, I think the whole funding issue is something that is intrinsically American, where we have this system set up where the majority of public school funding comes from property taxes. So if you work in a district where it's all upper middle class or wealthy homes, they're getting dollars on the dollars, not pennies on the dollars. They're getting 10 times as much in funding as a kid who happened to grow up on the other side of the train tracks, just to use a euphemism, you know, indicating disparity, right? So if you grew up in this city, in this district specifically, you're getting 10 cents on the dollar to what a public school in Atherton, you know, like Atherton versus East Palo Alto would be a perfect example, or you know, or like a suburb of Sacramento versus, you know, some of the nicer parts of Sacramento. I'm not familiar with Sacramento, but like, you know, it just goes to show. And federal funding makes up roughly 7% of school budgets, of public school budgets. So when you take that into account, and you take into account this whole allocation of resources, it will always seem to benefit certain segments of the population over others who need it more.
And I've only ever taught where there's clear disparities. And I remember like my first few years of teaching, I'd go and visit friends that I had done the teaching program with who taught in beautiful areas. And I remember going into their classrooms and I'm like, what is happening? You have like warm water in your sink. You have working pencil sharpeners. You have a Chromebook for every child in front of them. Like all these things that wasn't even a thought for where I was teaching.
And they probably didn't have to spend their own personal money on it. Like I know a lot of teachers that work in these lower income areas, they do it as a labor of love and they do it at their own expense. Like not only are you guys working every hour of the day just about, but what I read, something like every school semester, it's like $1,000 that you guys are coming out of pocket for just the bare essentials. We're not even talking about textbooks, which are 10 years old. We're talking about pencils, crayons,
Yeah.
you know, coloring books, like whatever it is. It's on the expense side of things, relatively inexpensive, but it's still coming out of your pocket.
100%.
And that's a huge issue because even so this year our school got put on like a program improvement because of low test scores. And so while that's not positive, it comes with extra funding from the federal government. So it can be looked at as, you know, like a chance to get some money into the hands of kids. But everything, and this is through no fault of our admin, but all the money that schools receive almost, especially if they are like Title I or on program improvement, is coded mostly just for like textbooks or for programs. And so none of it is what they need, you know? So we're like, oh, we want classroom materials. Oh, we want art projects. Oh, we want hands-on science.
Yeah.
That's going to engage these kids. Oh, we want field trips. Oh, we want, you know, we're not.
Well, actual things that help kids learn and grow is they like with kids, they learn through experience. It's not necessarily reading a textbook. Like it just, like most studies will indicate that at that age, going on field trips and touching things with your hands and going to the Exploratorium in San Francisco will teach you infinitely more than learning a few facts from a textbook. And I think that's a whole other issue that we could maybe talk about at another time, is this idea that in the US, more so than in other horribly socialist places, we don't want to use that word, socialist places, but we teach to a test. We teach to standardized testing here versus to actual learning. So kids are learning just long enough to pass a test, and then the information's gone. And over time, you find out that they're nowhere near at the standards at a place like Finland or Germany or France, and a lot of these places, Denmark. They're consistently scoring higher in most categories because they're not necessarily teaching to these standardized tests, which I think is a horrible way to go about teaching kids, especially at 7 years old.
So I attended this workshop this weekend, dismantling white supremacy in schools. And we actually talked about that a little bit. And they said it's about, you know, think about it as quality over quantity. And we're always worried about the quantity. And then we're like, it's that, again, teaching to the standards and trying to get everything pushed in. Like Allison said, but I have to teach all of this stuff within that day. And where's the time? And that's a real feeling. I know it well. But again, it's like digging into the work and making it more, focusing on the quality again over the quantity. But something about COVID that really just strikes home to me when we're thinking about our kids, and we talk about the, you know, disparity of our young ones who are disadvantaged. Not only do their parents work, they're working multiple jobs. So they have the lack of resources at home. They're also the population that are being more impacted by COVID. And so not only are students, you know, facing trauma, we don't know whether there's abuse in the home, whether it's verbal abuse, emotional abuse, whatever, physical abuse. They're not in school where that's their safe haven, right? So there's the trauma of that. Family members may be sick. They may have died. There's several families that have already passed away in the area that I'm in. So there's all of these pieces, these layers that these kids are going to come back. And I think that's what we need to really think about, is how are we going to support our students' emotional needs when they do finally get to come back? Because they're not going to come back and be like, yeah, I'm ready to learn. No. They might be a little bit of a hot mess, and we're going to have to help them through that.
And like, how many schools have counselors or
an adequate number of counselors?
Yeah. Right.
Or adequate number. Like, our principal went to our school board monthly begging for a counselor. And they're like, no, but you have money if you want more textbooks. It's like, that's not helpful, but having that, like, we have to be prepared for something like that. And even just the news cycle, say nothing else is happening in their lives, which we know that that's not the case. Even the news cycle right now
is
a trauma.
Right.
we can feel it as adults, but our kids are seeing it too.
Oh yeah.
Right. And it affects a lot of our kids. It's some very
Right.
real, hard things that affect the families of a lot of the kids that we teach. And it breaks my heart, that we can't be there as a resource right now and have those really great discussions, because teaching to the test does not create like citizens of our world by any means. So in our classrooms, when we can have these community circles or meetings and hit on these hard topics, even if they're 7 or 8, that's what they need to become, like active participants in the world. And I fear that when we go back, there isn't going to be time for that. It's going to be this catch-up game of, those kids need to be telling time and writing X, Y, and Z paragraphs. And you're like, how about we sit and talk about what they just went through for a year or more?
Right.
I think,
And also, who's taking care of the teachers? I always go back to, like, if we're taking care of the kids' emotions, and that with that comes the families, who's taking care of us, or who's making sure that we're taking care of each other, right? That's another layer that concerns me.
I think it's high time to shift the Overton window from where it currently is, which is to improve test scores and to improve the people that operate within this infrastructure, because you guys aren't adequately supported in a lot of ways, and financially is sort of the common sticking point for a lot of people. Like, we can't pay teachers more, and it's like, well, maybe they don't want more money, maybe they want more assistance for their kids to have a person to talk to that's a professional. Maybe it's more about having resources so that all the kids that come to school are at least going to get 2 meals a day, whether it's breakfast and lunch, because some of these kids, the only food they get is at school, and now they're at home and left to fend for themselves. And this is going to create a cascading avalanche of future problems that I think we're being incredibly short-sighted in this idea of, well, we'll give $1,200 to every family and good luck. Kids don't go to school, they learn online, good luck with that too. It's showing, I think, a lot of fractures in our educational veneer, and it needs to be addressed, because if it's not addressed within the next semester or two by school standards, we have failing test scores now. It's going to be significantly worse within the next year or so if we're not doing the right things to take care of our kids and our teachers by extension.
Right, because if you're not taking care of their emotional needs, how are they able to focus and learn?
Exactly. It's a symbiotic relationship. All these different facets of a person's being all play into each other. So if you're having trouble at home, that's going to affect your school. If you're not eating well at home, that's going to affect your school. If you're getting bombarded in a horrific news cycle of 150,000 deaths in the United States, and there's almost 1 million people dead worldwide, and there's 250,000 new cases every day, even for a 6-year-old, they're cogent enough to understand things aren't good right now. And that constant bombardment is going to overlap into the 3 of yours, your realm. And you don't have the tools. I mean, you do the best you can, but there's only 24 hours in a day, and you have 25 students, and there's only one of you.
Right.
And we're not, unless we've sought out our own trauma-informed teaching training. Like this summer, all 3 of us are seeking out our own types of trainings to prepare for this. It's not given, or if it is, it's a 1 hour after school, and then cool. But psychology is a whole degree. We can't even pretend that we're prepared to help with these emotional needs. We can only just say that we're here.
It's like a band-aid on a broken leg.
Yeah.
Like, oh well, we can.
And
stop
that's
the
already
bleeding,
existed.
Yeah.
Because kids, they go through so many things. Or even if there's, like last year, we were having kind of a hard time with our 6th grade class, and it trickled down to primary, and that's what our kids would want to talk about and like want to help figure out how to make our school safer. And they hear everything and they want to talk about it, and not necessarily with their parents, and not even necessarily with me. I can sit back and say very few words in their circle, and they're talking to each other and figuring things out and giving each other hugs and making everything feel better for themselves.
Yeah.
And they're going to be missing that for a while, and I could cry. It's really sad.
before we conclude, I think that was actually a pretty good segment to sort of weighing ourselves off. But are there any specific things the three of you want to say that you think is an important message for people to hear as educators?
I mean, I guess a lot of like what's on my heart is like you show a lot of appreciation for educators, and that there's a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes, or a lot of things that are not our decisions. Actually, like very little of what we even get to teach or how we even get to teach is up to us. And so like I think that I can say most of my colleagues are trying to do the best that they can and the right thing. And we're trying to address like all these different things within us, not just with COVID, but talking about biases and like trying to be better, like with anti-racist teaching and things like that. And so we fall short in a lot of ways. But overall, I think that teachers try to do the best that they can, which is not like a cop out for not doing the work. It's just a lot of it is systemic, and we need to like focus on that to make the most impact in our changes, I think.
I mean, you guys can only really do as much as you can with the resources and the freedom that you're given, right?
Yeah,
you know,
we can change one classroom at a time, but I think to just focus solely on like what our teachers doing misses the point that it's the entire system of education that needs to be uprooted.
Yeah. And Kayla knows this. I went as a teacher, I was always like, well, why isn't the principal doing this or what, you know, and you always want to go right to your next in charge, right? And think that they have all this power. And then I got into that position. I was like, nope, the power doesn't lie with me. And then, you know, and then I went into the district level and I'm like, oh, the power is still really not here. It's very interesting because it's like the board runs really the district. But then when it comes to finances, like Kayla said, it's really a larger systemic issue. Like you mentioned earlier too, Luca, it's like where that funding comes from. And then how Kayla said how it's actually delineated to very specific things. So the flexibility is really not there so that the educators can say where that money should be used.
Right. And I would just say with COVID times and things in general that like having grace for teachers is really important, and that I have grace for the 27 families in my class every day. I will take every reason why you forgot to send a lunch, or every reason why you missed school for 3 days, or your child is tired, or you chose a football game over reading. Like I will take all that in and not judge you and allow it and work with your kid in a positive way. So like you need to allow that same space for teachers right now, because we do it for we give grace to everyone always, and I feel like right now people are not giving us that, and that doesn't feel good.
No, I think to sort of jump on that, when COVID hit, all of my business disappeared. I had a job taking care of animals and doing, you know, dog training. And then I sort of filled in the gaps with Uber where I could. Overnight, I went from making X amount to 10 cents on the dollar. And that's not even an exaggeration. And living in the Bay Area, that's impossible. So the first thing I did was find a job, any job, because I didn't have the time to be picky about, okay, I already have a job, so I can sort of hedge my bets and try and get more money doing this or that. So I took an essential job. And as someone who works essentially, it sucks, man. And I feel like people have gotten worse. Like at the beginning, people understood this was an emergency and decisions had to be made on the fly. But now people have just become onerous and frustrated, and they're taking it out on the wrong people. They're taking it out literally on the people that are trying to educate their kids, or on the person who is helping bag their groceries, or the person who's, you know, picking up the garbage, like all the essential folks that are still working, that don't have the luxury of working from a computer. And I think just the key word is people need to find their empathetic button and hold that down. Just hold it down, because the only way we're going to get through this without people literally killing or sneezing on each other, which might be the same thing at this point, is through having empathy. We won't get through this as a civilization or with any civility if we don't have that. And I commend the three of you for taking the time to come on, Allison, Kayla, and Claudia. I hope
Thank you.
we can do this again. I really appreciate your input and your insights.
Thanks for having me, Luca.
Thank you.
Take care, you
Bye,
guys. Be
ladies.
well.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Thank you. You too.